So, it's been a minute. The last time I talked about classic Mega Man on this channel was with a game that's sole purpose was to celebrate just how far the series had come. The game in question was developed by a company that always had a very interesting history with this series, Mikanuchi Engineering. Now, I have absolutely no idea what happened to them. There's like no pictures of the company's logo anywhere, and they apparently closed their doors in 2002, seemingly for good. The reason why I even bring this up is because during the early 90s, these guys had their fingers on a lot of Mega Man projects. And by a lot, I mean like 6 games, but that's a lot by my standards, okay? Around the time that Mega Man 4 came out and the brand was starting to adopt an annual release model, the folks over at EMI were tasked with creating Game Boy versions of every single console entry released to that point. Now, at first glance, it seems like these versions are just your standard ports of the NES games, with all the pros and various cons that come with that. And for a really long time, that's all I've really ever chalked these games up to, given just how little I knew about them. But everything changed when these games were re-released on the Nintendo Switch Online service. And I quite literally mean everything. I went from completely ignoring these games' existence to actually being very excited to see them brought back. Although, if I'm being honest with myself, I think the reason why I was so excited was because there really is just nothing else Mega Man related to look forward to right now. So at this point, I'll just take whatever the hell I could get. Also, to be fair, I'm not a complete newcomer to this series. I am 99% sure that the Game Boy version of Mega Man 2 was the very first Mega Man game I have ever played. Not just of this series, but in general. In 2015, I remember having a few leftover eShop dollars on my 2DS and decided to give the Mega Man series a shot with this game. I chose Airman Stage as my first pick, and game over like 3 minutes later. So while I'm not completely inexperienced with this series, it has been almost 10 years since I've last played it. And seeing that it's officially summertime and I have this tradition of covering Mega Man related content over the summer, now is as great a time as any to finally see exactly what these games are about and why I don't see many people talking about them. Here goes nothing. I've been lied to. Here's the thing with the Game Boy ports of these games. They're not ports. Every single one of them are pretty much entirely original Mega Man games that just use the same Robot Masters and level themes as the NES installments. Each of them have their own level design, stage gimmicks, and even music sometimes. And it's because of all of these things why the series is referred to as an entirely different name that honestly gets the point across a lot better. In the United States, these games simply reuse the NES names, but in Japan, they're actually referred to as the Rockman World series. So you fuse the two together, and that's how you arrive at the Mega Man World series. Admittedly, it's not the most creative name out there, but at the very least, it is a lot more respectful to what these games actually are. It was such a pleasant surprise to figure this out as I was playing through them. And it only made my first playthroughs of these games even more memorable than they otherwise would be. But with all of that being said, far and away my biggest concern that I had going into this was how well each of these games are actually going to play. As a diehard Nintendo fan, I kinda have to come clean. The Game Boy is the one Nintendo system that I have the least amount of experience with in terms of its library. But even with the games that I did play, the physics that they're attempting to emulate have always been very hit or miss. And with a series that demands as much precision and accuracy as classic Mega Man, I had such a hard time imagining that the core characteristic of the series would transfer to the Game Boy all that gracefully. But I wasn't even a couple seconds of playing through Airman Stage, and all of my worries were put to rest right then and there. I am incredibly happy to say this, but these games are classic Mega Man as you remember it, with all the same bells and whistles working in the exact same way as they did on the NES. However, we can't forget that we are still on the Game Boy, and as a result, there are some unavoidable compromises. I actually decided to start playing Mega Man World 2 first, seeing that it was the only one of the bunch that I was somewhat familiar with, and I was quite impressed with how good the movement and physics were in that game. Everything felt normal and responsive and, the way it should feel. However, something that I realized going on to the other games is that the physics are actually different depending on the game, which is weird. In World 1, 3, and 4, Mega Man's jumping isn't as precise for some reason, because after you jump, he'll keep moving in that same direction for a second even if you weren't pressing down the D-pad, which definitely made me incredibly worried about what precision platforming was going to look like. Luckily, even in the sections that do require you to be more precise, the controls never got me killed, so I guess I can't really complain that much in that regard. But I don't know, I still find it very weird that the second game didn't have this issue, but every other game afterwards did. The game exclusive differences don't stop there, however, because each of these games uses a different Mega Man moveset based off of one of the NES games. So Mega Man World 1 uses Mega Man 2's moveset, World 2 uses Mega Man 3's, World 3 uses Mega Man 4's, etc, etc. Now, this is actually something that I really like about these games, as it makes every entry feel different and avoids that derivativeness that the NES games tend to suffer from. This is something that also affects the weapons of these games, as a select few of them have actually been tinkered with. The metal blades, for example, are nowhere near as powerful as they were in the NES game, and you can no longer stand still when using them, which makes them a lot harder to abuse. The charge shot in World 4 has also been modified to push you back a little bit upon firing it, which finally implements a downside to your default weapon, making the game a lot more balanced as a result. It doesn't really change the fact that I still main the Buster for 90% of the game, but I can still respect the fact that the devs are willing to put in the effort to balance these games properly. It just shows that the team really knew what they were doing, and had a lot of knowledge about these games going in. But even still, there were those very few weapons that managed to slip through the cracks, and are more or less just as broken as they were in NES form. Case in point, if the individual who programmed this is watching this video right now, so far, as I've hopefully made very apparent at this point, I was and still am pleasantly surprised by a lot of the things that these games do. But I have yet to talk about the one aspect that has unquestionably surprised me the absolute most: the level design. Again, I went into these games not knowing that the levels had completely different layouts, but even when you ignore that, I definitely couldn't have predicted just how well designed and polished these layouts would be. I know this is going to be a very bold statement even for my standards, but all of these games have console tier level design. Nothing about the levels felt like they were being held back by their smaller screen size, and given this series' handheld track record, that is ginormous praise, trust me. However, while I think that these games are very well designed given the hardware, this does not mean that the games won't bash your teeth in. I would argue that all of these games are some of the hardest in the entire franchise. They are not holding anything back, and arguably more so than the NES games, these games are very unforgiving. This is by far the most noticeable with Mega Man World 1, because Jesus Peasus. The enemies are a lot more aggressive, there are entirely new enemies that have different behaviors, and your Mega Buster is a lot weaker, meaning that said enemies are going to take longer to die. Have fun! Admittedly, I do feel like some of its difficulty is a result of how much slower both the game and the Mega Buster is. This is a game on the Game Boy, so it totally makes sense for this to happen. However, regardless of the game, I really want to hammer this point home. Very little about any of these games comes off as being cheap or flat out annoying. Everything is placed in a fair and readable way. And actually, I'd say that's more likely that you'll die from taking repeated shots than it is by falling into pits, proving that the folks over at ME truly understood that these games were about patience and observation, and that just rushing through them is only going to get you killed. Of course, some games are going to be more resistant to this rule than others. Mega Man World 3 is definitely the one out of the bunch that I'm not very fond of, given the fact that it's a lot more okay with having questionable enemy placements that aren't really excusable if I'm being real. And World 2, for as much as I really like that one, it's also by far the easiest game out of them all. Not much about these levels put up much of a fight. And even with the low difficulty, the game also has a couple cheap deaths of its own, which is very frustrating. But even with those flaws, I still think that both games have their moments of excellent design despite all of that. However, one major flaw that the levels throughout the entire series has is slowdown. Because yeah, it's pretty bad. Given the fact that these are Mega Man games, a lot of things are going to be flying across the screen at once. I'm assuming that the designers overestimated the Game Boy's potential, because if more than 3 things are on screen at once, things will chug. World 4 by far got the absolute worst of this, unfortunately. It never gets to the point where it's unplayable, but so often will the game slow down because things just started to get a little bit crowded. It sucks too, because World 4 has my favorite selection of levels of the entire pack. The set pieces are a lot more memorable and use the aesthetics to great effect. It features totally original platforming hazards that are actually really fun. And it's still one of the more difficult games in the series, with moments of cheapness being very rare. I said rare. While each of these games are very challenging, they do quite a few things that actually help out less experienced players. This is the first time in the franchise's history that splits up the Robot Masters into 2 batches of 4, which, like its 16 and 32-bit contemporaries, allows for a much more smoother difficulty curve. World 4 marks the first time that any of these games had a shop that you can buy E-tanks and extra lives from, thanks to little P-chip collectibles that you can find in the stages. World 4 also features an exclusive buster upgrade upon getting 4 consecutive game overs, which is unheard of, by the way. It's almost suspicious whenever a game like this does that. But the fact that the devs went out of their way to ensure that even less experienced players can still enjoy the game shows just how much they cared about it and how they wanted as many people as possible to experience it. It's thanks to these 3 major things that assure the player that they've got all the tools that they need, and it's just a matter of skill and practice in order to push the game along. However, when you push to about the halfway point of these games... What? Wily? Okay, so apparently after you beat the first 4 stages, you just go straight into the Wily castles, which definitely caught me off guard. Some of the games have you fight a boss when you get here, but after that, I just assumed that these 4 rooms are the Wily stages. Historically, these have always been some of the hardest parts of their respective games, but hopefully they're not too bad. No way. No way! Oh my god. Okay, so in a shocking turn of events, the Wily stages of these games are actually 4 more Robot Master stages that are from entirely different games. This was by far the biggest surprise of the entire experience for me. And like with the level design, I was so happy that I went in without knowing any of this. I've always liked a good mashup or 2 every now and again, and the existence of these levels pretty much confirmed to me that that is what these games actually are, mashups. In some of the earlier stages, you can notice that some enemy types and stage hazards were pulled from different games. Even the game-specific movesets kinda hinted at this. I mean, why else would you have the slide when going through Mega Man 2 stages, or the charge shot in Mega Man 3 stages? Like, it was just so cleverly foreshadowed, and the fact that they actually went along and did this, seemingly only just to make me fanboy like an idiot, deserves all of my respect. The levels themselves are also just as fun in their own right, and as a classic Mega Man addict, I was just so happy to see enemies and mini-bosses from Mega Man 4 in a level from Mega Man 5. I'm a very simple man. I should also mention the fact that although Mega Man World 2 through 4 does this, World 1 doesn't. for some reason. Mega Man 2 Robot Masters are still in the game, but you don't play through their stages and instead just fight them one-on-one, after which you obtain their weapons, which is pretty disappointing, not gonna lie. But on the bright side, you no longer have to refight all 8 of the Robot Masters anymore. You just fight the ones from Mega Man 2, and that's it. That's actually something that some of the other games do as well. I mean, aside from World 4, which again, very disappointing. But the Robot Master refights are completely absent. This already means that these games have the far superior endgame. But this also means that all the bosses that you will be facing in this sequence are all going to be new and unique. This is all we wanted. Now, admittedly, the bosses in the endgame are incredibly hit or miss, with a lot more misses than hits I might add. But I'd much rather go up against something new than spend up to 10 minutes fighting the same bosses that I already know how to beat. But let's back up a bit. Before the endgame even starts, you might notice that there's an ominous figure appearing on the stage select. These guys are actually an entirely new group of baddies known as the Mega Man Killers, which sounds like the name of a cult. Anchor, Punk, and Blade will appear depending on which game you're playing. And instead of going through a stage and then fighting them, these guys will just show up and show out. I honestly think that they're a great inclusion, and the fights themselves are easily the best fights in their respective games. And when you defeat them, you'll get entirely new weapons in the same fashion as defeating a Robot Master. Oddly enough, there isn't a Mega Man killer present in World 2. Instead, we get a battle with Quint, which I thought was one of them at first glance, but apparently he has nothing to do with any of them and is just fighting Mega Man because he's really mad at him. I respect it though. I would also want to kill anything that makes this face whenever he slides. However, seeing that I am the biggest nerd, I cannot continue this video without mentioning this one simple fact. If you played Mega Man 10 before, you probably already know what's coming. Upon defeating these guys, you then move on to the final stages in these games. It is slightly different depending on the game, as some of them have the stage before you fight the killers, and others just have their own escape sequences upon defeating the boss. However, none of that matters, because if you played the special stages in Mega Man 10, you might recognize a few of these aesthetics, and gimmicks, and everything. Yes, these are the same stages from Mega Man 10, and I don't blame you guys for getting tired of me saying this, but I popped off when I got to these stages. Oh my god! For the longest time, I just thought that there were entirely new levels that they gave to Mega Man 10. But to see them in their original state, and to now know where these stages are actually from, was really exciting. Not gonna lie, I was kinda thrown off a bit that the music wasn't the same, which was a slight letdown. But I can't complain that much, seeing as I could literally recognize some of the room layouts as being the same between the two. But fanboying aside, that's really all I have to say about them. They still have their memorable moments for all the right and wrong reasons, but in general, they're still pretty by the numbers even this far into the games. But I still love them, because again, shameless fanboy. But like every single classic Mega Man game in existence, all of these games end with a fight against Dr. Wily, and every single one of them aside from World 3's are really good. I find that World 1 and 4's were my two favorites. Both fights have really fun to dodge attack patterns and are just so incredibly brutal your first time. I must have spent almost an hour on each of these machines on my first playthrough and enjoyed every single minute of it, which really speaks to just how much fun, but also fair, the design of the bosses are. You on the other hand, World 3's Wily fight was far and away the worst designed out of them all. The first phase isn't really that bad, just a bunch of dodging missiles and sliding under his attacks, but phase 2 is just plain stupid. You have to get so close to the machine because the only way you can damage it is with Punk's weapon. A weapon which doesn't travel very far, mind you. There are also orbs that can block your shots, which means that the only way you can guarantee a hit is if you move closer to the mech, which almost always means that you are going to be taking a hit. I had plenty of E-tanks on standby, so it didn't take me too long to finish, But even with that, this might just be one of the worst designed bosses in the classic series. But on the bright side, I do like the fact that the Mega Man Killer's weapons are the weaknesses to all three of the machines, which is admittedly very cute. You wanna know what else is cute? This guy. Look at him, look, he's so tiny. World 2's final boss might possibly be the easiest in the entire franchise. It's so easy in fact, that when I first beat the game, I saw the credits roll and was very confused. I didn't even know that I was fighting Wily until my second playthrough of this game, because of just how tiny he is. Like look, how is anyone supposed to make that out? To its credit, the fight is fairly competent, and I love how Wily changes contraptions when you hit him enough times. Other than that though, while I still prefer it to World 3's boss, it is still kind of an anticlimax. However, with all of that being said, each of the game's endings are more or less the exact same deal. Wily's castle explodes, Mega Man walks away, the credits start rolling, rinse and repeat like 4 more times. World 4, however, actually ends on a bit of a somber note, with Blade showing up for one last time and sacrificing himself in order for Mega to escape the exploding fortress. How sad. But with that, the Mega Man World series comes to a close. And holy broly guacamole, these games are so freaking good! I'm not gonna be around the bush any longer, because as far as I'm concerned, these games are worth every single Mega Man fan's time. Especially if you are as savvy about the classic series as I am, there are so many things about these games that'll make you smile, get you excited, and overall just make you very proud to be a Mega Man fan. Looks can definitely be deceiving. I know the fact that they're slower paced Mega Man games on 8-bit handheld is going to turn a lot of people away, but I promise you, you are in for a really good time. They're not the greatest Mega Man games of all time, but the sheer fun factor simply can't be denied. After playing through each of them many times over, I really gotta level with you all, it's very disheartening to see them be ignored like this. Their releases on NSO marks the 3rd time that these games have ever been re-released. There was no Legacy Collection, there were no enhanced ports to the Game Boy Color. Matter of fact, the closest thing that we got to that are some fan-made reduxes that look fantastic. But these games absolutely positively need more attention. But man, like, I wish this series had that one game that really blew people away. The level design in them is already original and unique, but imagine a game in this style that was completely original. I'm talking new robot masters, new locations, a new sidekick, hell, they could even throw in a new default weapon to spice things up. Even if the series would still be under the radar for a lot of people, a game like that would really bring the entire concept into a whole other level. I could just see it being so good and fun and hard and satisfying and oh, I forgot about that one.